Okay, we're live now. We're live. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Universal Peace Federation. My name is Ray LaPalkin, and our topic today is the role of media in advancing civility in the public square. In today's climate of political polarization, we're desperately in need of ways to bridge the divide between the left and right, between faith-based and secular worldviews. We will examine the Dignity Index, co-founded by Tami Pyfer and Tim Shriver, directors of Unite, a nonprofit aimed at easing divisions and elevating political dialogue. And joining Ms. Pyfer today is Dr. Thomas Selover. He is president of the Professors World Peace Academy International. So we'll get to hear from both of these innovators on how to bring more dignity and mutual respect into the public square today. Sounds very interesting. And this program, this seminar is sponsored by the International Media Association for Peace, and we call it at UPF IMAP. It's one of the associations of the Universal Peace Federation. And IMAP strives to be an open forum in which journalists and scholars can discuss issues freely and promote the defense of human rights, and by promoting universal values leading to mutual prosperity and peaceful coexistence in our global community of nations around the world. And our moderator today is Ms. Peggy Ujiri. Peggy also serves as the executive director of UPF in Colorado, and for over 40 years, she has been organizing and promoting interfaith activities both in the US and internationally. And she's also the founding member of the Interfaith Council at Stapleton, and the current president of the Asian Roundtable of Colorado. The Asian Roundtable is currently in its second year of a major project to address anti-Asia bias and hate in Colorado. And Peggy lives in Denver with her husband, Kenji, and they have 3 adult children. So Peggy, you have wonderful credentials. Perhaps in the future, we can have you as a panelist. We can explore further all these wonderful activities that you're pursuing. But for today, Peggy is our moderator. Peggy, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ray, for that wonderful introduction. I'm just so pleased to be able to be part of this program today, and I'm honored that Ms. Pyfer and Dr. Selover are going to be our panelists, and there have been people that have really taken initiative in creating, addressing problems that we see in the world around us and taking initiative to try to find solutions, which is the only way to solve problems is, you know, instead of complaining about them, get out there and try to do something about it. So I'm going to introduce Tami. Tami is the Chief of Staff and Director of Operations for Unite. And prior to joining Unite, she was the Education Policy Advisor to former Utah Governor Gary Herbert. And there she was involved in state-level policy development, coalition building, and stakeholder engagement. Tami held local and state elected office for 12 years, during which time she was actively involved in numerous civic, community, and nonprofit organizations. Tami's professional training is in early childhood and K-12 special education for students with severe disabilities. Before her appointment in the governor's office, she worked as a clinical instructor at Utah State University, teaching teacher preparation coursework and supervising student teachers. So she's really had her toe in quite a lot of different public positions. So we're very proud to welcome Tami Pyfer.
Thank you so much, Peggy. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you. I have to admit, every time I would read the emails about your organization and Universal Peace Federation, I could not get this song out of my head. I've had the great honor of singing with the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square for 7 years here in Salt Lake City. And one of the songs that's often requested by the Tabernacle Choir is "Let There Be Peace on Earth." And so every time I get an email from you, I keep thinking those refrains of "Let there be peace on earth," and then the part that is really important, "and let it begin with me." That's the most important part of that song. And so just so you know, you've provoked a lot of thinking, and I hope actually my presentation today will touch upon the role that we each play. Let it begin with me, that we play in this the search that we have for peace and the work that we're doing with the Dignity Index. So with that, let me share my screen, and I'm really excited to speak with you today about the Dignity Index. Let me just start here. And kind of back to something you had just said also, Peggy, is this idea of solving problems. We believe that we have come upon a tool that will help us, will help augment the efforts of so many in the peace building space to ease division, prevent violence, and to solve problems. And I look at this very much as a problem solving tool. So we do a lot of work with the group More in Common, who does research on our divisions on polarization and peacemaking and peace building efforts throughout the world. And in a recent report, this was their Hidden Tribes report, they said that in this era of social media and partisan news outlets, America's differences have become dangerously tribal. This is not news to us. This is not new information. We all are probably living this experience every day. And it's fueled by this culture of outrage and people taking offense. And they go on to say that for the combatants, the other side can no longer be tolerated, and no price is too high to defeat them. One of our colleagues says that this is not just a zero-sum game, it's a negative-sum game between the winners and the losers. The More in Common group goes on to say that these tensions are poisoning personal relationships, consuming our politics, and putting our democracy in peril. And I bet I would not be far off the mark to assume that nearly every listener today to this webinar has experienced some type of a problem or a constraint in personal relationships due to the political climate that we find ourselves in. I know I have. I know it has affected my own family, my personal family, extended family. And it's really something that's quite painful. And as you step back and look at it, we think, all of this, all these problems for what? What are we fighting about in reality? So in this More in Common report on the Hidden Tribes, it shows, the breadth of the different political parties. They have what they call the wings. And then look at this group in the middle, what they're calling the exhausted majority. And you've probably heard that term before. I believe that those of us engaged in this work, are the exhausted majority. And my colleague, Tim Shriver, will add that we're not just the exhausted majority, we are the starving majority. We are starving for a better way. We are starving to repair these relationships in our families, in our communities, in our country. So in 2019, just shortly before I joined the Unite group, the team began to explore the causes of the distress, the polarization, and the cultural division in our country. They conducted polls, they traveled the country talking to youth groups, they consulted different experts, they did a lot of reading, and I mean a lot of reading. And their basic conclusion was this, that we're in the midst of a spiritual or cultural crisis. And it's a crisis that's created the collapse of shared sense of meaning, purpose, and trust. And the mindset that produced this crisis cannot solve it. And another thing that I love to hear Tim say is that only the problems of the whole can only be solved by the whole. So all of us are part of the solution, and we cannot use the same mindset that produced this crisis to solve it. The crisis has been precipitated by the weakening of institutions, and there's a lot of data on this, on how our institutions of religion or civic or education, that they have deteriorated over time. We don't see people engaging like they used to. And we believe that the crisis has been exacerbated by the outrage industrial complex, something that Arthur Brooks writes about in his work, and that media and politics are in an open conspiracy to really elevate fear, anxiety, and othering. And they make a lot of money off of us, off of getting us to fear, distrust, and hold each other in contempt. So our basic prescription from our early work at Unite was that we need new skills, new stories, and new solutions. And our mission then became focused on developing concepts or products capable of creating or championing this emergence of what we're calling a new culture of us. So one of these tools that we have developed is the tool that I will be visiting with you about today. So we believe that the problem, when you boil it all down, isn't that we disagree on policy or issues or our differences economically or politically or culturally. It is that we have this addiction to contempt. As Arthur Brooks writes in his book, Love Your Enemies, we have a cultural addiction to contempt, an addiction abetted by the outrage industrial complex, and it's tearing us apart. He goes on to say that if we want to solve the polarization problem of today, we have to solve the contempt problem. We believe that contempt has become really the language of political speech in America, and the rise of racism, anti-Semitism, and violence are evidence of that. Amanda Ripley writes about this quite a bit. And in her recent book, High Conflict, she says that political speech, we know from the research, can incite violence. She goes on to say that political speech can also reduce the likelihood of violence. Amanda has been called in to consult with members of Congress on how to prevent violence. And it goes back, she says, I talk about their speech. I talk about the way they are speaking to and about their political opponents and to different issues facing the country. And speech plays a huge role in preventing violence. So we define contempt as this, a feeling of disdain and disgust for another person or group. When you're feeling contempt, you see yourself above other people. Dignity, on the other hand, is the inherent worth that we all have from birth. Instead of seeing myself above you, I see myself in you. I see a part of myself. I see the humanity of me within you. We believe that the solution to contempt is dignity. And often when I talk about this, I can just feel the energy in the room kind of start to slowly let down and go, really? Dignity? That's the best you've got? Contempt is so strong, and dignity it can seem like a soft word or a soft approach. We believe otherwise. We believe it's a very powerful tool. This comes from one of our colleagues, Dr. Donna Hicks, who spent her career in international conflict resolution work across the globe. She worked with Desmond Tutu in Northern Ireland, and in fact, her work there prompted Bishop Tutu to ask her to write a book about her work. And when he asked what she would write about, she said, I would write about dignity. I would write about the power of dignity to solve these intractable conflicts that we have all over the globe. And so that's what she did. She wrote a book called Dignity, and Bishop Tutu wrote the introduction to her book. And she says that our longing to be treated with dignity is the single most powerful force motivating our behavior. It transcends race, gender, ethnicity, and all other social distinctions. Dignity, she says, is our inherent value and vulnerability. It's different from respect. We are all born with this inherent value. Everyone should be treated with dignity. Respecting you and respecting your choices is another matter, but I can still hold people in dignity, even if I don't respect necessarily their positions or their actions. He says we all want to be treated like we matter, and it is so powerful to offer someone that treatment and offer them this feeling that they matter. I hold you in dignity. So we believe that dignity can solve the contempt problem. We believe that our differences are not or our division is not caused by difference. And it's not caused by disagreement, but it's caused by contempt. And when contempt breaks us apart, we believe that dignity can bring us back together. A lot of people look at the title of our nonprofit organization, Unite, and say, oh, you just want us to unite and be nice to each other and all agree and all hold the same opinion and unite around one single opinion. That's not true. Yes, we want you to be nice. I'm not saying that's not true, but we want diversity. We value diversity. We want everyone to bring their opinion, their ideas on policy, their ideas on different initiatives that the country could take. We want you to bring that to the table, but we do want people to unite around one core principle, and that is that everyone should be treated with dignity. and that no one should be treated with contempt. And we believe that it is only through treating people with dignity and uniting around that core principle that we can begin to solve the problems that are facing our communities, our families, and especially our country. So the difficulty of promoting dignity is that it's really hard to maximize what you can't measure. I look back in my experience as a special education teacher, and if we're trying to increase or decrease problem behavior, increase appropriate behavior, even increase academic gains, how do I know that my intervention's working if I can't measure what that behavior looks like? So this goes to the premise of our dignity index. And this quote comes from Representative Emanuel Cleaver from Missouri. This was in the summer of 2021. He was speaking in front of a congressional hearing on the modernization of Congress. And he said, there are agencies and organizations that score us on everything we do, except there's not a single organization that monitors and scores us for decency and civility. So it's easy to come to the conclusion that that's not important. Luckily, we were working on the dignity index at this time. As I watched this hearing, it validated this work that we were doing. And I thought, if you could just hold that thought for a moment, we're coming. We're bringing a tool for this. So this is where we come now with our dignity index. This comes from our website, dignityindex.us. You can go to the website and get in-depth information on the index and how it works. And the index is an 8-point scale. So it measures speech from contempt at the low end, from 1 to 4, and dignity on the top end. We have to be careful to point out that we are not scoring people. We are scoring speech. As I think we can all appreciate, we could fall along the scale on any given day personally, on any given subject or situation that we might be faced with. I may wake up at a 3 some days and think to myself, those people are ruining everything. And when I catch myself, I try to move myself up the scale to a 5, a 6, or 7. And on my very, very best days, which might be rare, but maybe the rare 8. But we are not scoring people, we're scoring speech. So when you go to our website, dignityindex.us, you immediately come to the pledge, and we're asking people to take a pledge, and it's a pledge to treat people with less contempt and with more dignity. So the index isn't meant to be used like for everything. It's meant to be used for language that's spoken in moments of conflict. And it's not that we disagree or the fact that we disagree, but it's how we disagree. And as we apply the index in these instances, it can reveal how we treat each other when we disagree, or when we're angry, or we're hurt, or we're afraid. I often think of times when, not when I'm angry, but I'm very fearful and I need to find someone to blame. And I go to the dignity scale and I'm down on the bottom of the scale because I have found someone to blame for my fears or my anxieties. This is what the dignity index can be used for. It can help reveal that to ourselves. So as I mentioned, we've got the low end of the scale, which is the contempt end, and that's 1 through 4, and the dignity end of the scale, which is 5 through 8. I'm going to just walk you through this. I'm going to start in the middle. It's kind of easier to see how we might descend down into contempt, and then how we can move up into dignity. So these are kind of just general statements that really mark what the feelings are or the language can be at this level. So when you're at a 4, your thought is, we're better than those people. I don't trust them. I just don't trust them. 3 is not just that I'm better than those people, but we're the good people and they're the bad people. It's us versus them. And for anyone that's been involved in politics extensively, I've been an elected official for 12 years. I was an elected official for 12 years, and then in politics at the state level for another 7 years. It's really easy to fall into this trap that we're the good people and they're the bad people. My piece of legislation or my policy change is the good one and yours is the bad one. And it's me versus you. And I've got to win this because we use this language. Listen to the language we use. It's a battle. I got to win this political battle. We use the language of war. When you get to a 2, it's not just that we're the good people and you're the bad people, or us versus them, but you're evil. Those people are actually evil, and they're going to ruin our country if we let them. It's not us versus them, it's us or them. And I have to tell you, I'm on a lot of email lists, and I get a lot of political fundraising requests from the left and the right, lots. And there was one that came through a couple of weeks ago that had almost this exact language in it. This was someone raising funds. It was a politician raising funds and said, those people will ruin our country if we let them. So I need you to send me $50 was the appeal. But you see this language a lot. And I think people that use this language are not cognizant of the fact that they are using the language of contempt. I certainly, when I started working with the index, never saw myself as a contemptuous person. I get along with people. I didn't have public battles. I didn't call people out in public meetings. We had really vigorous debates. But in my head, there were times in my head where I'm going, you're ruining our country. You're ruining, education. You're ruining, our road system or whatever it might be. And it's me versus you. So even in our heads, even if we don't say it out loud, we have to realize it as we start to think these thoughts in our head. It can lead to language that then leads to policy decisions or dialogue that we have publicly that then leads us down this road of contempt, where you get to the bottom rung, which is they're not even human. I mean, you're ruining the country. If we let you, you're not even human. It's my moral duty to destroy you before you destroy me. And you see this language in genocide. You see this all over the world in situations where it has devolved to genocide. In Rwanda, in Germany, in too many places. And these actions started with language. They started with speech, which is why we believe words matter. Let's get to the happy part of the scale. When you are at a 5, you've lost this need to blame someone and lost the contempt, and you're kind of entering this neutral territory, which is the other side has a right to be here and a right to be heard. It's their country too. So 5 is fairly neutral, but you're on the positive side. 6 is when you say, I always talk to the other side, and I'm going to search for those values and those interests that we share. I'm going to find those things that are in common. I'm going to start seeing myself in you. And so you're looking mainly for things that you have in common or that you share. And then as you work your way up the scale, 7 is I'm going to look beyond the things that we share. I'm going to find those things that we don't share, why we're different, things that we may disagree on. And I want to fully engage with the other side, even on these values that we don't share, because I want to find out where they're coming from. I want to know what made you have that position, that policy position. I want to know why you feel it's so important to take a position which might be polar opposite of my position. So no longer am I looking just at those things that we do agree on. We're looking for those things that we may disagree on. And then number 8 is that we believe that everyone is born with inherent worth, and therefore we treat everyone with dignity no matter what. Now think about this as a problem-solving tool. We've talked about this a lot as far as political life. And when you're in a campaign, and we've had pushback by people saying, well, I can't campaign at a 6, 7, or 8, I will never win. I will never be able to show the difference between me and my opponent. And there is a case to be made about pointing out how you're different from your opponent in a political race. But we believe that you can make those cases staying on the top end of the scale, staying at a 5, staying at a 6. But when you get elected and you are the representative of the people who has been elected to solve problems, then you should be living up here at the 6, at the 7, at the 8, and using those tools of dignity to solve the thorniest problems facing our country and our communities. So we felt like we needed to test this tool out. We wanted to get it validated to see if it was valid and reliable. And so we entered into a pilot project for the 2022 midterms last October. And we did it here in Utah. We have connections in the state, but we also had some help with researchers here in Utah that had done this type of work before. And the questions that we wanted to answer were, can this be built? Can it be accurate? Can we accurately score political speech like we think we can? And can we use this to start a conversation? And most importantly, will people be interested in the conversation? So this was our group of student coders. They are undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Utah who belong to they're associated with the Hinckley Institute of Politics and the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute. We had a very diverse group of student coders. They were diverse ethnically, racially, they were diverse politically, especially politically. In fact, when we had the students get together to code or to score the political speech, there was always a minimum of 3 students doing the scoring, and they had to represent different sides of the political spectrum. And then we often would have separate groups of 3 score, and then those groups would get together to score to make sure that we were getting a variety of background and political interest involved in the scoring process. A lot of people worried about that. People from the left would worry that it was a right-leaning group of students scorers, and people from the right were worried that it was a bunch of liberal students, scoring the speeches. So we had a very diverse mix of students. So I want to show you just a little bit, kind of a quick recap of what came out of our pilot project.
Careless, reckless.
The radical leftist.
Another tax break.
This month, a national movement to encourage voters and politicos to reject
Let me just pause that for a second. Are we able to hear my video?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I was afraid I didn't push the wrong button, or I didn't push the right button. So here we go. Let me see if I can get that back to the beginning. There we go.
Careless, reckless.
The radical leftist.
Another tax break.
This month, a national movement to encourage voters and politicos to reject contempt and reward dignity launched a pilot project here in Utah.
The project is simply called the Dignity Index.
The first ever Dignity Index was released today, scoring the messages from Utah's political candidates.
Based on the research of specialists in conflict resolution, the social impact initiative Unite designed a 1 to 8 scale to measure speech for dignity or contempt. The lower the number, the more contemptuous and divisive the language.
What we've found is that people are starving for a break from the contempt and hatred and divisiveness. And let's also be clear, the stakes here are high.
We have divisions that are not caused by disagreement. They're not caused because we think differently. They're caused because we have contempt.
Contempt actually kills curiosity.
Contempt takes away our ability to talk to each other, which takes away our ability to solve problems together, which can take away our ability to hold our democracy together.
This is not a score of how nice people are necessarily.
That's right. This is not about speech police. This is not about kumbaya group hugs. This is about how we speak in terms of elevating the conversation to something a little bit different.
There's really important efforts to change hearts and minds and have public discussions. But what I like about this is it focuses on behaviors, and behaviors are changeable.
To change behavior, you have to be able to define the behavior, and then you have to measure the behavior.
And so we've trained a group of ideologically diverse coders, liberals and conservatives, working together.
Looking at campaign letters, debate transcripts, speeches, social media accounts, and trying to quantify, is this speech dignified or not?
Hi, my name is Stephen Lenhoff.
Iridacunda Esperance.
Madeline Jones.
Susie Estrada, and I am a student at the University of Utah.
In the training, what was really heartening to see is that we could get a lot of agreement across this broad ideological spectrum.
The great thing about it is everyone can understand it because it's really just about how we treat each other.
My thoughts about political dialogue have changed through this experience, internalizing that dialogue as a tool.
If you could just read the index, it makes you think about, well, what's a more inclusive way to say this and a more inclusive way to say that.
And I think one of the most important parts of the Dignity Index is not what it's telling us about our politicians, it's about what it will tell us about ourselves.
It's funny that we designed something as a grading tool, but what it's turned out to be most powerful as is a mirror.
And this changed the way I've had conversations with my children, with my neighbor, with my colleagues at work.
The Dignity Index changed me. And yes, you can challenge the scoring, but that inspires a conversation.
Any problem of the whole is going to require the whole. We're trying to not just open the door to civility and dignity, but open the door to the freedom to express oneself so that we can actually integrate the best of each other.
Think if we had a Congress that could talk to each other, that could actually solve problems. And part of the Dignity Index goal is to develop these types of relationships in disagreement to where we can solve problems.
When we learn how to communicate in our entire community, we're better off.
We're talking about a practical strategy for actually moving the country forward.
Those that don't know the Dignity Index should definitely explore it and get to know what it is.
The Dignity Index is our attempt to introduce to families, to businesses, and to politics a new way of solving problems by not treating others with hatred and contempt, but rather by treating others with dignity.
So we had a lot of lessons that we learned in the Utah pilot. It was a very positive experience for us, and we felt like it was quite successful. We were excited that Amanda Ripley actually traveled to Salt Lake City to follow us for a week as we recapped and finished the project. And she wrote about it in Politico magazine, a 6,000-word piece about the index in Politico magazine. And she saw some of the same things we saw highlighted in the pilot. First of all, we found that the index does work. It works to grade speech. And the speech can be graded accurately, reliably, with high inter-rater reliability, and that it does engage media leaders in debate. We found that a cross-section of leaders, business, faith leaders, civic, and especially education leaders, who are supportive of the mission and the product, the index itself, and they want more for their institutions. We discovered, as Tim described in the video, what we're calling the mirror effect. People want to use the index in their own lives. And this, we had hoped for this case, not talked about it a lot, but hoped that people would see more applications for this than just grading politician speech. But we really were overwhelmed with the amount of people, the consistency with which people contacted us and said, wow, I really see myself differently. I see my language differently. I have a lot of work to do. There are better ways for me to communicate my mission, my organization's mission, and with my own family. We also saw, we weren't expecting this one, the agency effect, where people felt empowered to be able to do something about the problems that we see in the country. We often think that it's just too big, that we think of the problems, and if the problem is inflation, or the problem is, the border, the problem is, you name it, the number of the divisive problems, that those are just too big for us to make a difference on as an individual. And people walked away from our project saying, I can do something. I found something I can do to make a difference. And that is adopting the index. Some of the challenge that we still face is that people still doubt that politics can or should prioritize dignity over principles, but we're working on it. So let me just kind of wrap up with some actions here. We believe that the index can be used to show people that contempt is the problem, that they contribute to it, and that they can use dignity to help solve it. We hope that the Dignity Index will guide and encourage people to use more dignity and less contempt in what they read, what they say, what they watch, and what they support. And we want to encourage people to expect dignity from the people that represent them, from the people that entertain them and that inform them. And we believe that this is how we create this constituency that rewards dignity, and that's how the culture can start to change. So what's next? We are going to be building a network across the nation's college campuses of these student groups who learn how to code, but also mobilize our dignity movement. We're creating online resources and cultural change tools right now for people who say, I want this in my organization. I want to bring this to, my business. Can you show me how to do that? And then we will be applying the Dignity Index to local, state, and federal campaigns. So again, we want to change the culture. We want to tune out those voices that are profiting from contempt and instead create this grassroots movement of Americans who reward dignity. This was a quote from the University of Utah president that I'll leave in closing. He said, the Dignity Index relies on one of the most ancient tools for social change in the history of human beings. That is our conscience. When we see how often we use contempt and how harmful it is, we see we're a part of the problem, and that makes us part of the solution. So back to the beginning, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let me do my part. So that's our project. Thank you for allowing me to share it with you.
Well, thank you very much, Tami, and that was fascinating. And I especially was interested at the end when you said you're moving this onto college campuses, which I think could have a great effect. We're going to have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have questions, please be sure to type those into the chat for our panelists, and then we can, at the end, we will try to take some time to answer some of them. But right now, I'd like to go ahead and move on to our next panelist, Dr. Thomas Selover. And Dr. Selover is International Coordinator for the International Association of Academicians for Peace, IAAP, and he's the International President of Professors World Peace Academy, PWPA. He previously served as president of Sunhak UP Graduate University outside of Seoul, Korea, and he holds a doctorate in comparative religion and East Asian philosophy from Harvard University. Dr. Selover has taught for many years at universities and colleges in Canada and the US, as well as in China and Korea. His current research focus is on the values of human relatedness in promoting a society of interdependence and mutual prosperity. So welcome, Dr. Selover.
Well, thank you very much, Peggy. Thank you for your wonderful introduction, and I'm so grateful for Tami's amazing presentation. I think we're really on very, very good ground. I want to say at the outset that it's part of the longstanding mission of PWPA International and other countries as well, to promote intelligent, respectful discussion and dialogue on major issues affecting world peace. So I'm very happy to be able to participate together with you in today's webinar. I want to begin, if I can share my screen, let me see if that will work smoothly enough. Okay, let's try this. Okay, good. With something that happened a long time ago, back in the 1970s, when I was applying to college. One of the colleges that I applied to was Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And at that time, I saw an editorial cover image from their student magazine, and that image has stayed with me ever since. Now, I haven't been able to locate that image, though I've scoured the internet to try to find it. So I'm going to have to ask you to imagine it with me, and bear with me as I try to describe it. So it's the image of two arms and hands. One, we can say African American, and the other Caucasian American. Now, not this image, but I'm starting from this one. Imagine modifying the image you see on the screen in the following way. The African American hand was actually holding a paintbrush and was busy painting the Caucasian arm with white paint, chalk white. And meanwhile, at the same time, the Caucasian hand was painting the African American arm black, ink black. So I found this image to be a marvelous capturing of portraying the other as a polar opposite, exaggerating difference and dehumanizing each other in the process. It was a brilliant portrayal, in my opinion, a portrayal of portrayal and also of betrayal. Today, 50 years later, we are still suffering from and perpetuating the same phenomenon of polarization in the case of race and also in the case of politics that I'm coming to now. In today's political rhetoric, as we're all aware of, we have the discussion of red states versus blue states, So these are the untied states of America. Here are the blue ones and the red ones. And this again is a matter of exaggerating differences and dehumanizing one's opponents. If people are reacting without reflecting, just based on their emotions, then this is what we see. Two sides pitted against each other. It's a kind of conflagration of emotion, as we've just been exploring. And that's why it's very hard to have a reasonable political discussion in America today, because all of our opinions get so emotionally charged. In fact, there are people in every single state who hold a range of political opinions. This means that there are no really red states or blue states. All the states are red, white, and blue. Now, I'd like to draw a comparison with some sports journalism. In sports journalism, reporting is characterized by balanced accounts, showing the virtues of both sides, and of the different plays and how the game proceeded, and who's ahead at this point and who's ahead at that point. The losers are always still credited with great plays and great efforts along the way. That's what makes good sports journalism. So the even-handedness and fair rhetoric of sports journalism can be a model for political journalism as well. So I'm suggesting that we apply an analogy from soccer to the question about wings. In political journalism, we talk about the left wing and the right wing. But in soccer, we have the left wing player or the left winger, and we have the right winger, as you can see here in the upper part of this illustration. Both of the wings, what is their purpose? Their goal is to support the center forward so the center forward can make the goal for the sake of the whole team together. But rather than thinking of the wings, red versus blue, a better configuration would be, well, there's the red wing, okay, and there's the blue ring, okay, but both contribute to and uphold the center direction of where we're trying to go together. And this brings up a concept that is found around in the discussions of UPF called headwing. A headwing is a term that was coined by PWPA founder, Dr. Sun-Myung Moon, who, by the way, was a great fan of soccer. I want to talk a little bit about headwing. Dr. Moon originally articulated the concept of headwing in a theological context. So let me just give a short quotation. The left wing, the left and right wings fight if there's no head, don't they? The head, what is the head? The head contains the root of the nervous system. Then what, or who, is the root of all roots? The root of all roots is God. Headwing thought comes from God, and that's why the original mind, which takes the highest position within us, finds satisfaction in it. Now I'm picking up the discussion. In order for a headwing approach to develop, there has to be mutual respect for each side and for the whole purpose. In the absence of mutual respect, which we've just learned in great detail, it's very difficult for productive give and take to develop. Without the consciousness that we're all on the same team and the mindset to support the focus, then we cannot win. In discerning the nature and direction of headwing thought, it can be helpful to recall the destination that headwing is headed toward, like this plane over here on the right. In terms of social vision, the destination can be described as interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. And by the way, the two words that are in my title, you might remember, civic virtue and co-righteousness, actually derive from the concept of universal values. They are, in a way, translations of each other. So a headwing approach in journalism, then, would aim toward rising above labels and using neutral terminology that invites shared understanding. On the political level, Advancing headwing would not be so much trying to convince others of the righteousness of one's own position or views, but rather seeking a fruitful discussion based on the faith that there is a headwing solution. It is possible to find something which is forward of both of the existing left and right positions, and which includes the righteous principles on both sides. Then we also need the determination to find that solution through vigorous shared thinking and discussion. In a counterpoint to the Marxist dialectic approach, which holds that progress advances through contradiction and struggle, headwing approach suggests that the actual way forward is neither from only the right or only the left by itself, but rather an understanding of give and take together with bottom line respect for both sides. The overall goal is shared improvement, or what we could term co-progress. A consequence of this way of thinking is that the foundation of this headwing strategy has to do with co-righteousness. It's not only on one side. Conscientiousness is on both sides, as we've just heard about conscience. So that kind of universal value and co-righteousness that can be understood cross-culturally and beyond the rhetorical divides of factions on the political right or the political left. Applied to journalism, headwing would indicate that going for coverage that is helpful in portraying issues so that real mutual understanding and real discussion and co-progress can develop. Well, we've heard that polarization is dehumanizing. And so the antidote would be rehumanization. The Cambridge Dictionary suggests that rehumanization means something like giving back to someone the human qualities of independent thought, feeling for other people, the sense of empathy, other things. When I think about humanization, then I want to bring a couple of points from the Confucian tradition, if I may. Confucian traditions of civic virtue. Confucius said on one passage that the noble person is not invariably on one side or the other, but for what is right. The phrase "what is right" can also be translated as what is appropriate, what is fitting to the situation, bringing in the context and calling for discernment. Another translation of the same passage says the master said, well, exemplary persons in making their way in the world, and we all want to be exemplary persons and to uphold that for one another, are neither bent on nor absolutely against anything. Rather, they go with what is appropriate. So that's the character for right and for appropriate. Another Confucian phrase that I find helpful is "he au bouton," which means harmony without conformity. The idea is that noble folks, and we all want to be that, can harmonize with each other even when they don't agree. Whereas those who give in to pettiness cannot harmonize even when they fully agree with each other. We can even call this harmony in diversity. A third Confucian recommendation is to pay attention in speaking to the tone of voice, as well as to the actual language. The observation is that a kind tone or an unkind tone has more effect on others than the literal kind or unkind meaning of the words spoken. Colloquially, it ain't what you say, it's the way that you say it. The foundation for the recognition of co-righteousness is the affirmation that each person is endowed with a conscience. Therefore, the key to restoring civility is not trying to get each other to agree with our views, but rather promoting the spirit and context of conscientious consciousness and mutual respect. One more. In order to promote a constructive atmosphere of serious discussion for those who hold very different viewpoints, I like to suggest the peace-building attitude of win-win-win thinking. Basically, win-win-win thinking means the whole inclusive purpose is always considered. Compromise and cooperation is not only for the mutual advantage of two sides, for me and you, but it includes, and even primarily, the benefit of the whole purpose in which we are all involved together. Win-win-win thinking, win-win-win, in political arrangements, economic pursuits, and social life can be a basic guideline at every level. That is, a headwing approach leading to co-progress. In conclusion, I note that the founding affirmations of IMAP include the phrase, universally shared values lead to mutual cooperation. Universally shared values, as I noted earlier, is another way of speaking about co-righteousness and also civic virtue. In fostering mutual cooperation, the educational role of the media is not about demonstrating what to think, but rather how to think, how to be thoughtful, how to consider. Educating by example the process of weighing perspectives and possibilities and discerning what is fitting and appropriate in the present context. But we cannot expect the media to change until we ourselves as individuals and eventually as a society change what we're searching for. So as a last point, I'd like to offer a suggestion for a kind of self-monitoring for social media. Just as there are self-activated controls for limiting obscene and violent content, so there ought to be voluntary controls for limiting inflammatory rhetoric. By deselecting and screening out sources that indulge in incendiary commentary and unfriending the unfriendly, individuals can improve their own mental and relational health and contribute to a reordering of the social media environment for all concerned. So these are the thoughts that I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas, and for those comments. And that brings us to our question and answer session. But before we start, I just wanted to ask Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is the president of UPF International, if he would like to offer a few comments. He's joining us today. He's on mute, though. You're on mute, Dr. Jenkins. Looks like you're double muted.
There I am.
Okay.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Tami and Thomas. I can't thank you enough for this presentation. We are really in need of this. Tami, I was working on religious freedom, and I was with Brett Scharfs from Brigham Young University and also Jan Fiegel recently, and they did this incredible book on the dignity and the Declaration of Human Dignity. I am so inspired. This is what they found, and also Cole Durham at Brigham Young found that, this is for interfaith cooperation. This is rising to be a central pillar of how we can bring faiths together. The moment we go into theological discussions, it can become more very, very difficult. But this dignity is universal. So I want to thank you for that. And Thomas, thank you for Confucius. You're an expert in that field, but the principles are universal. I'm so happy for this program, for Hans and IMAP to see these great developments. Peggy, congratulations. Another great program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like to pose a question to both of our panelists. So Dr. Selover and Mrs. Pyfer, from the various presentations and perspectives offered today, the role of the conscience in healing human relationships was emphasized. What role could or does the media play in awakening or educating conscience in the public? Why don't we go to you first, Ms. Pyfer?
I was thinking during some of what Thomas was saying, and also about the topic of the media, about what I've learned in recent months about solutions journalism and about what Amanda Ripley often writes about. And they talk about complicating the narrative, that it's not, and that it's the journalist's job, that they should be not, and it's not in a way that I'm going to make it so complicated you can't understand it, but to not fall back on everything is black and white, but to show that the narrative is complicated, and to bring in those pieces that may not paint a black and white picture, but give cause to think and give the reader a chance to look at how the diverse experiences of a person might have led them to that position, or the different complex variables in any situation. And so this phrase of complicating the narrative has taken on kind of this new meaning for me. And I do agree that that is a great approach that journalists can take in order to get people thinking a little bit deeper about the problems that face us.
Thomas? You're muted.
I very much agree with that, and I'm fascinated with the concept. I think the media is stimulating to conscience, that by presenting alternative perspectives. So I think of movie reviews. I mean, a good movie review that, it's not all one-sided. It talks about the strengths and the difficulties and the artistry and the shortcoming all at once. And so reading a good movie review, and Siskel and Ebert and others, then your aesthetic sense is stimulated to think about all these elements of the production. So I think if we can learn something from movie reviews and sports journalism, I think it will help the rest of journalism to have this kind of stimulating function. Thank you.
Ms. Pyfer, we've done such a good job of pushing any kind of religious values out of schools and out of the public square in many cases. What impact do you think that has had on the general dialogue?
That's a good question. And I know that there's a kind of a growing controversy over teaching things like kindness and empathy. And it all depends on what you call it, right? When those were called civic and character education, it was okay. But recently, different political sides have said, but don't call it social and emotional learning, because social means, it could mean something else. And so they've labeled things like social emotional learning, which are these values that are universal values. Honestly, they are perspective taking, empathy, kindness, being able to work with diverse groups of people, to problem solve. Those are similar skills to, like, when we talk about religious values or traditional values that many fear have been taken out of the classroom. I think we have to be vigilant to watch for other values that are not controversial, that should not be controversial, and don't let people that are profiting by dividing us call empathy controversial. Don't let them call perspective taking something that should not happen in our schools. So I think being able to be a little bit broader. I love the way that the president put it. I've just lost his name, the president of your organization, which is dignity itself. We have almost every worldwide religion can agree on the fact that dignity is a priority, and we all agree on the dignity of every human being. That's a religious value, but it can also be a social value that we all hold. And so I think holding to some of these values that are accepted universally and bringing those back into the public square will help us deal with areas that perhaps are not welcoming of religious thought or calling something overtly religious. I can teach this value of dignity, and I can teach this value of empathy. And it happens to align with my religion and many other people's religions. But I think we need to continue to push these as universally accepted values. And if we need to decouple it from religion based on the circumstance that we're in, because we have governments or government-funded institutions that are careful about that, then we do that. But we don't give up on the value. We continue to teach that value.
Thank you. Sounds like you're talking about universally shared values. Yeah. So, Dr. Selover, you recently returned to the West from a long stint living and teaching abroad in Asia. And how would you characterize the differences in these issues between the two cultures?
So that's a big topic. Well, I've been living and working in Korea for those who like, that's the context where I've been. It's a really good question because America is much more diverse than Korea is. So it's a very, there's much more opportunity for broader understanding here in the United States. In terms of political polarization, Korea has the same problem. The different parties for each other have the same kind of rhetorical issues that we have in the United States. And that's why the policies of the government are lurching, depending on who's the president. And it's very hard to build any kind of consensus about where the country should go in really serious, important issues. So I would say that we're in the remedy is quite similar. There is a deep Confucian tradition in Korea about mutual respect, and all of those elements that I were talking about are deeply part of the culture. However, maybe they're not being emphasized today in the same way, and the modernization means that they have gotten most of the diseases that we're suffering from too. So I think it's the same kind of solution. This is a human problem altogether. We have much more in common with each other than we have as differences, and then the differences make sense in context. And so, thank you. That would be my comment.
Thank you for your comments. Well, we've reached the end of our 1 hour program, but so we're gonna, call our program to a close here to respect all of your time. But we do invite you to stay on with us for an additional 30 minutes if you'd like to. We're gonna stop the recording here. And if you'd like to continue the discussion and if our panelists, if it fits with your schedule, they will also continue on with us, and then we could just have a more open discussion of some of the topics that we've touched on today. And I want to just thank Tami Pyfer and Thomas Selover for their incredibly insightful presentations and for all of the new questions that they have brought up in our own minds and that we have learned from them. And I hope that we and continue the discussion with them, and that we can also make use of what they have taught us today. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Hans Moyer to lead the follow-up discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you once again, everyone. Thank you, Tami, and thank you, Thomas. It was an enlightening and inspiring presentation, and I think we are all looking in the mirror right now. Awakening. I just wanted to say, Tami, when you were giving your presentation, I felt like my mom's talking to me, and she's telling me, this is how you should do it.
that is high praise to sound like someone's mom. Really awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's a time, it's a woman's era that we're living in, and we need artistic and practical solutions to these problems. That's what you gave us today. So thank you so much for that. Again, if you do have another schedule, please leave whenever you like. But we're just going to open it up to the viewers. If you have questions, is EJ still here?